We're going to talk about the Founding Fathers and what their beliefs were on the Second Amendment, and I think it's pretty obvious, and to say otherwise, I think, is just being quite dishonest about what our founders' beliefs were when it came to individual firearms ownership and the purpose of what that was. So when we look at the spiritual component being a rifle, and I don't get into the religion, I don't get into any of that stuff. I'm not a pastor, rabbi, priest, none of that stuff. But we can think about spirituality in terms of getting outside of yourself. In other words, having a purpose other than just your immediate gratification in life. I'm talking about spiritual in terms of, think about the fighting spirit that our founders had. I mean, think about the fighting spirit that our ancestors had in this country. I mean, if that wasn't the case, then we would have still been attached to Great Britain. I mean, and if that's the case with Canadians right now, that's the case with Australians, people in New Zealand, right? They're all subjects. Like, their sovereign is the Queen of England at this point, and it'll eventually be the King of England again. So they owe their allegiance to a human being, right? Here in the United States of America, we do not recognize any monarch in charge of us. We do not recognize that we are beholden to some aristocratic class of people, right? Our sovereign is the creator of heaven and earth. It says so in the Declaration of Independence. It says that we are endowed by our creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we recognize that sovereignty comes from the creator of heaven and earth, and that we as human beings have natural rights, and as natural rights as human beings. And certainly as Americans, because that's the entire doctrine of our nation. The entire doctrine of our nation is that we have God-given rights and virtue of our humanity. We are allowed to exercise those rights. And in fact, the only reason why we allow government to be in charge of us is to protect those rights. And when we start getting outside of that paradigm, when we start getting across into areas where people believe that the government can tell you how to live your life, and that not only are they going to be the protectors of those rights, but the prime violators of those rights. Thomas Jefferson and the Committee on the Declaration of Independence said that it is the right of the people to alter or abolish that government. Alter means change. That would be like removing powers from government. That would be changing representatives in government. That would be, and certainly, making it more suitable to our needs. And I'm not talking about mud democracy. I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm talking about we're a constitutional republic. Constitutional republic has rules. We have fixed rules, right? This is not based on feelings. Democracies are based on feelings. I wish people would stop using the word democracy to define the United States of America. And nowhere in our founding documents is the word democracy written. Nowhere. It's not in our Constitution. It's not in our Bill of Rights. In fact, the only place, one of the few places that it's mentioned is in the Federalist Papers, where it is viewed so unfavorably by the people that wrote the Federalist Papers that they lay out the case. Madison writes it out very clearly in the 10th Federalist. He also talks about democracy in many other places in the Federalist Papers, as does Hamilton and John Jay. So when we look at the word democracy, it's bad in the context of the United States of America. Democracies are the examples of ever-changing rules based on the whims of the people. So in other words, one group of people can tell another group of people how to live. If you're in the majority, you're right. That is not the Constitutional Republic. Constitutional Republic is, yes, a majority may be in power, but they must respect the rights of the minority. Madison talks about this as protecting against factions. He talks about it protecting against factions in government. And when it comes to the Second Amendment, and this one right here, our rights from the Creator. They come from the Creator. And this is recognized in our founding document. Our founding document as a nation is the Declaration of Independence. And it says very clearly that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The right to life means you have a right to live your life, beget offspring. That means you have a right to not only sire offspring, but to live your life. But just as inherently equal and valid in this is your right to protect your life. And regardless of what some United Nations bureaucrat tells you, and regardless of what some idiot in Washington, D.C. tells you, you have a right to protect yourself, your family, your nation, your neighborhood, and anyone else that you deem fit. Now, I will tell you guys that the right to life, it goes far beyond birth. It goes far beyond you just living it. It means our right to life is so sacred and is so undeniable in our country that any single animal species out there has a right to defend itself when attacked. You don't believe me? Go take a walk through my blackberry bush over there and see if that doesn't have a right to protect itself. It has thorns. Animals can fly. Other animals have fangs and claws and teeth, but the United States of America, we human beings are very good at making tools. And the quintessential tool, the predominant tool that we use to protect ourselves right now is the firearm. The pistol and a rifle. The pistol being the dagger, the rifle being the bow. These are weapons of antiquity. We're just transplacing them into the future now. Pistol, short-range weapon. Rifle, a long-range weapon. The dagger, a short-range weapon. The bow, a long-range weapon. We are simply introducing technology into rights and activities that human beings have done for thousands of years. If governments hated weapons so much, why do they use them so much? They don't hate weapons. They hate people other than them owning and possessing weapons. They hate people like you and me, that people that will actually defy and challenge them and say that they've overstepped their bounds and then say you no longer have the consent of the governed to govern us. They hate people like us having them. And which is why we're one of the few nations left on the planet where part of our citizenship is that we have the right to keep and bear arms, which has been upheld by the Supreme Court over and over again. And even if it wasn't upheld by the Supreme Court, individual ownership of firearms in this country existed before the Supreme Court existed. Individual ownership of firearms existed in this country before the nation was even brought about to existence. How do you think we brought about our nation into existence? The individual right to keep and bear arms. And the rifle absolutely helped establish this country. If it wasn't so, they fought 8 years for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And instead, you're talking about one of the first successful independence movements in the world that overthrew its mother country. And it started out peaceful. It started out with petitioning the government for redress of grievances. It started out with people saying, hey, all we want you to do in Parliament, and as the sovereign and the King of England, all they wanted them to do was respect their natural born rights as Englishmen. That's all they wanted them to do. And of course, their petitions fell on deaf ears. Their protests did nothing. And instead of softening, instead of taking a less bellicose form, instead of that, the British government doubled down on their rhetoric. They doubled down on their rhetoric. They started sending government officials to collect taxes. They started sending government officials to come into people's homes and take their food that they earned. They started taking people into the city, and they started holding illegal tribunals and trials, and they started eventually taking people from the United States, or the colonies at the time, and then transporting them to England for trial. And if you think about that today, that would be like somebody taking you from your community and then taking you to some federal jurisdiction. So now we're looking at a situation in history why the rifle came about and became transcendent on the battlefield. We had many people that grew up shooting firearms back then. We had people that were very skilled at arms. You know, there's this whole myth that during the American Revolution that the Continental Army, or that the Continental Militia, or the militia of the states, there's this big myth that these guys just got together and knew how to shoot from hunting and all that stuff. And that is absolutely false. These people were highly skilled. They knew how to drill. They had equipment in good working order. They knew how to shoot. They knew how to move as a unit. And quite honestly, they understood how to fight as a unit and how to drill. And they did this for several years before Lexington and Concord. It wasn't that they just showed up with their stuff and shouted, rah, 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 you're not going to push me around anymore. No, these people got ready. And it took years and years and years for them to do so. Now, when we have to look at this also, when you look at your freedoms, it's not this unlimited thing. Guys, I'm about as libertarian as it gets. All right, I really am. I'm a libertarian person with conservative tendencies on social issues. Okay, that's neither here nor there. Even me, as libertarian-minded as I am, I can tell you that freedom is not this unlimited thing. Yes, we have an individual right to firearms outside of the Second Amendment. This is true because people own guns in this country and in this land before the Second Amendment was written. They owned guns before the United States came into existence. They owned guns many times and centuries even before this. So yes, we have an individual right to keep and bear arms that is independent of the Second Amendment. But when we roll the Second Amendment into this portrait, when we complete the portrait even more, firearms ownership in this country can also be related to not only the freedom to keep and bear arms, which we would have outside of government and do, but when it's related to government, we have a right to keep and bear arms because a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So our rights to keep and bear arms are not to be infringed by the government, at any level, by the way. And so then if we have that, we have a right not only to keep and bear arms, but necessary to the security of a free state. You want to know who the safe keepers of this country are and who the gatekeepers of this country are? It's not government and police. You look in the mirror and see it every time you do so. You're that person. And because we've deferred this responsibility over the last decades and centuries, if you don't use it, you lose it. And now we've gotten to the point where even the word militia is a bad word on the news, when in fact it's the bulwark of the Constitution. Without the militia, without the Second Amendment, all the rights in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution mean absolutely nothing. And you know how I know this is true? Look at what happened in Canada last year, this year. Look at what happened in Australia earlier this year and last year. They have their little Bill of Rights too. That didn't help anybody who was forcibly pushed into their house or choked by a police officer or had their kids taken away from them and put in a sports stadium where they couldn't gain access to it. And where they're supposed to be a part of Western civilization. What part of Western civilization are you talking about? You talking about the Middle Ages, of which our ancestors roundly rejected? No, this is, we're at the point in our time in our history, we're at the point in our time in life where we've got to recognize that this freedom is tied to security of a free state, not a totalitarian state, not a bureaucratic state, not a government state, not a Washington, D.C. state, a free state, at which a state at which the people that are in charge of us are at direct odds with. And you got to be able to defend your home and your community as well. That's also been under attack the last couple of years. People have just decided that they want to go burn stuff down. People have decided they want to go beat people and hurt people. Well, you know what? There's consequences that come to that. And in times past, I can promise you this, that there would have been many people out there stomping them. And in many communities, they did. In many communities where the government disarmed people, they were able to roam with impunity and hurt and terrorize people with impunity and be seditious. And they were able to do that stuff. Why? Because we didn't have an armed populace there. The only people that were armed were the criminals. That is a mob. That's democracy. And I also want you to contemplate this. Are you prepared to defend your rights from others who would forcibly take them away? And that's a statement and a decision everybody is going to have to make for him or herself. But I can tell you this, that in no example in history can I think of where either voluntary gun giveaways back to the government or whatever it is, right, at no other time forcible confiscation, where within a decade or even shorter than that, did that lead to a totalitarian society where people were incarcerated en masse or straight up killed in a genocidal manner. Why do you think countries like China don't allow their people to have guns? Why do you think countries like North Korea don't allow their people to have guns? Why do you think places like Venezuela don't allow their people to have guns? Why do you think places like Cuba don't allow their people to have guns? If you notice though, during the revolution, their violent revolutions, they allowed the people to have guns. And then when they took over, the only people with combat experience were the ones that had guns. They took them away. It's just like the Bolsheviks in Russia, the Soviet Union. It's just like, you know, anywhere else that you can look at a totalitarian regime. They want people to use guns to bring them into power. And then once they get into power, then they remove that option. Why do you think the British wanted to confiscate the militia's arms, powder, and supplies? Because they knew there was a fight coming and they wanted to remove it. Guys, gun control is simply this. It is the disarmament of the political opposition. I may not agree with a single word that the Democrat Party says. Hypothetically, right? I may not agree with a single word that the Democrat Party says. But do you think in a million years that any one of you would say, oh, a Democrat shouldn't be allowed to have a gun? Never. Never, right? And that's the problem. Is that the inverse? Or is it the fact that almost 2/3 of Democrats want people in this country disarmed? Now there's useful idiots and there's true believers. The useful idiots just think if all the guns went away, the world would be a happy place. The true believers know exactly why they're doing it. The true believers know exactly why they're doing it. They want a brave new world, and they don't want any opposition. They want lambs led to the slaughterhouse. Now, I can tell you this, guys. You give up your guns, you give up your life. You won't have a country anymore. At least not one that you recognize. Not one that I would recognize. Not one that our founders would recognize. Not one that our ancestors would recognize. Not any true American would recognize. And this is important stuff. Totalitarian governments do not like private ownership of firearms. They specifically don't like rifles. And they really don't like magazine-fed intermediate or battle rifle-fired cartridges or rifles. Why? Because that's how you fight back. If our government really believed that weapons of war were dangerous, why did we spend more money on the Ukraine to arm them than we did in the first several years of our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? It's pretty weird, isn't it? If our government truly believes that weapons of war are dangerous in the hands of civilians, then why did they send more money than they spent on education in this country to the Ukraine to arm those people? To protect their border, right? This is the hypocrisy, so you know it's BS. You know they don't believe that stuff. Okay. And Samuel Adams said the following. He said, "The said Constitution shall never be construed to authorize Congress to infringe the just liberty of the press or the rights of conscience, or to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceful citizens from keeping their own arms." Guys, that's Samuel Adams. Like, that's Massachusetts. What do you think he would say to that Attorney General there right now? He just laid out what the intent of the Constitution was. The Constitution says, shall never be construed to authorize Congress to infringe on the just liberty of the press or the rights of conscience, or to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. He said the Constitution shall never be used or understood to prevent people from keeping their own arms. He's the original patriot. Loyal Nine, Sons of Liberty, Congress. So if anybody would understand the spirit of the Founding Fathers, if anybody would understand the spirit of the United States, it's Samuel Adams. And you can say, well, he was just one delegate. He was just one representative. He was just one guy from Boston. Well, we used a northerner. Why don't we use a southerner this time? Let's see what Richard Henry Lee has to say. To preserve liberty, it's essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. Nor does it follow from this that all promiscuously must go into actual service on every occasion. The mind that aims at a select militia must be influenced by a truly anti-republican principle, and when we see many men disposed to practice upon it whenever they can prevail, no wonder true Republicans are for carefully guarding against it. So we have a two-thought quote right here. Let's start before the infamous semicolon or whatever. To preserve liberty, it's essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. So that's the first thought. He equates liberty with the proliferation of firearms and competent use of firearms by all people in this country, and that should start as early as possible. Now, where are we at in public education now when it comes to the individual use and thoughts on firearms? Well, I guess that would be based on where you live or what school district you were in to a large degree, but by and large, what would you say a vast majority of children in this country today are taught about firearms in the school system?
Bad, they're evil.
Yeah, evil, bad. They only meant the National Guard. What's this say? The whole body of the people. You guys know what a select militia is? Since we mentioned it in this quote, it says the mind that aims at select militia must be influenced by a truly anti-republican principle. He's not talking anti-republican party. That didn't exist. He was talking about the anti-constitutional republic. That's what he's talking about. So what would be a select militia?
group of people who doesn't agree with you, political adversaries?
Possibly, but in his context, he's talking about a select militia.
Any individual group that's, indicated individually. It's any kind of select militia rather than the entire people.
So you're right on track. So can we deduce that a select militia is not the whole body of the people?
Right.
So who do you think would want only a certain small group of people to have firearms?
Those who are going to go for power.
Like Alexander Hamilton. Yeah, he wanted a loyal core of people in a select militia that would answer only to him. So when he says the mind, he's actually flipping the middle finger to Alexander Hamilton here. Because everyone knew it was Hamilton pushing for the select militia back then. So the idea that only special people, or only licensed people, or you can only do it if you're a part of a government agency, or you can only do it if you're a part of the military, you can only do it if you're part of the police, you can only do it if you're a political loyalist. This whole idea that you can only keep and bear arms if you're in one of those groups is not only anti-Republican, but true Republicans are for carefully guarding against that idea. So the essence of our true constitutional republic is that the whole body of the people has and possesses arms. The rhetoric that we hear today, the Hamiltonian rhetoric, that's a carryover from the first big government ideas of the Federalist Party. You guys think we've politically divided now? No, it's always been this way. Patriots and Tories, Federalists, Anti-Federalists. On and on down the line we go. At least they guarded their Marxism earlier because it didn't exist. I mean, the ideas existed. They used to call, instead of Marxism, they used to call socialism leveling. In the time of our founding fathers, they referred to socialism as leveling because people wanted to level the playing field. You ever heard that? Level. Redistribute the wealth. Spread it around a little bit. They used to call it leveling. So don't think that the founders wouldn't understand what socialism was. They knew it very well because they lived through the French Revolution. They read up on the Romans. They read up on all those societies that tried these failed concepts again and again. So they knew. They absolutely knew what socialism was. They just called it by a different name. But it in practice was the exact same garbage that we're having to listen to today. So they fought the same fight that we're fighting today, guys. The only difference is that back then people were a little bit more educated than today. So we need to call out this stuff and we need to stand up for our rights each and every day. And when you hear people going off on these rants about you don't have a right to keep and bear arms, or the Constitution doesn't mean what it says, you need to stand up in the gap for it. You need to stand up in the gap for it because that's garbage. And I'm tired of hearing the propaganda about people are so historically ignorant that it makes me literally nauseous every time that I hear it. And these are supposed to be adults. College-educated people. Of course, that doesn't mean what it used to. But I'm not university material, so I can't speak to that. And here we go, Mr. Sunshine himself right here. Der Fuhrer. Now his idea is this. The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subject races to possess arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subject races to carry arms have prepared their own downfall by so doing. Oh, it's all good because here's the thing. This is every gun controller in a nutshell. Except for subject races, they just look at us as inferior people. We're not as smart as they are. We're not as smart as Klaus Schwab. Right? We're not as smart as we're not as smart as Barack Obama. We're not as smart as we're not as smart as these elite people that know so much better than we do.
So the actual ruling class, they know that we're onto their game, so they see us compared to their base as more intelligent, most likely, right?
Oh no, they would look at you as an archaic throwback. You're a barbarian.
See the game.
Yeah, but you just need to be educated. Okay, you need to go to college. Right? Their colleges, right? With their faculty and staff. So the thing is, guys, is like, here's the thing. You guys, I don't know if you believe in good and evil or not. I do. I think good exists in this world, and I think evil exists in this world, and I really don't think that there's a gray area in there. I think that your either heart is full of goodness and goodwill towards your humanity, or it is not. And here's the thing. I'm going to show you guys that good and evil can mirror each other. And sometimes we get the discernment. Sometimes we see things, maybe in a spiritual context. Follow me on this one carefully. Follow me in this ethereal grain here, this ethereal strand. The Second Amendment, the right of the people to... What's another word for keep?
Possess.
Yeah. The most foolish mistake we could make would be to allow subject races to possess arms. So the first part of our Second Amendment. History shows that all conquerors have allowed their subject races to... What's another word for carry?
Bear.
There you go. Good and evil. Parallel with each other. Mirror image. Just an inverse. And when we look at this stuff and we look at evil versus good, I believe that our founding documents, I believe that they were put in place for the good of humanity. And I believe people like this were put in place for the evil of humanity. And I think that when you start realizing that the people that want to disarm you, some of them may be useful idiots. But they're taking their orders from true believers.